The EU is a supranational organization that enacts laws with binding force on its members. Simultaneously, it functions as an international organization based on the consensus of its members. Unlike the EU, the UN, which is a typical international organization, does not have an organization consisting of representatives elected by its members. In other words, the EU has become a strong cohesive force that connects Europe economically, politically, and culturally. This raises the question, why isn't there a similar EU organization in Asia? The answer lies in the vastness of Asia. It is the largest continent in terms of both landmass and population. 60% of the world's total population lives in Asia, spread across 48 countries. In contrast, only 11% of the population lives in Europe. Consequently, Asia lacks a unifying culture to bring together such a vast continent with diverse cultures, mirroring its immense size. We can classify Asia into different regions: East Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, South Asia, and West Asia. Despite being classified as Asians, people from these regions do not know each other well due to limited communication and differing cultures. For instance, if a Korean were to meet someone from South Asia or West Asia, would they feel a sense of similarity? Not at all. Therefore, it is impossible for Asia to promote the formation of a single community akin to Europe. However, there is another perspective to consider. Is it possible to create a community among similar Asian countries? It is not entirely true that there are no regional communities in Asia. Two notable examples are ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and APEC, Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. However, both of these organizations primarily focus on economic matters and do not extend beyond cultural and societal aspects like the EU. Hence, we can learn from Asia, particularly from the complex relationships between Korea, China, and Japan. Do East Asians recognize themselves as East Asians? Actually, they do not. They do not share a common regional identity as East Asians. This is because the conception of East Asia originated from the perspective of Western Orientalism in the 19th century, not from East Asians themselves. East Asian countries did not identify themselves as part of East Asia. Before the era of colonization and semi-colonization during the imperialism period in the 19th century. Historically, China had a dominant role in East Asia. However, this rule was fundamentally different from Western imperialism. It was referred to as the tribute system. In which peripheral countries would pay tribute to China, and in turn, China would recognize the king of the peripheral country. While the tribute system may give the impression that the peripheral countries were under China's sphere of influence, they were able to establish their own independent spheres of influence. Therefore, the relationship in East Asia cannot be defined as China's colonialism, as viewed from a Eurocentric perspective. East Asia had its own systems of governance and existed independently from China. This is in stark contrast to the European system, where countries easily communicated through marriage and ruling over each other's territories. The concept of East Asia emerged during the imperialism period, particularly led by Japan. At that time, Japan opposed the Chinese world order system, and joined the ranks of imperialist countries by proclaiming the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. This sphere encompassed a desire to establish an independent military and economic bloc in Asia, incorporating not only East Asia but also extending beyond Southeast Asia and Oceania, distinct from the Western powers. Japan justified its colonial history using the notion of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Examples of this can be seen in the Sino-Japanese War and the colonization of Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Okinawa. However, this brutal experience of colonization has left deep scars in Asian countries, especially Korea and China, which continue to affect them to this day. Furthermore, the differing ideologies of socialism accepted by China and North Korea, and capitalism adopted by Korea and Japan, make it increasingly difficult for them to cooperate and unite. Unlike Europe, which pursued denationalism after the scars of Hitler's strong nationalism during World War II, Asia continued to advocate strong nationalism due to colonization. This was a deeply emotional response for Asia, which had long been denied its own identity by both Japan and the West. As a result, while Europe abandoned nationalism and sought cooperation, Asia focused on its own survival rather than collaboration, aiming to assert its own identity. So, why couldn't Asia cooperate and unite as Europe did? The answer lies in the fact that there was never a common conception of Asia to begin with. Specifically, East Asia has never considered itself a single national community. Asians identify primarily with their own nationality rather than a broader, Asian, identity. If you were to ask a Korean, "Are you Asian?" they would undoubtedly respond, "I'm Korean." Europe differs from Asia in this regard. There are clear reasons why Europe pursued cooperation. The initial impetus for European integration was the need to counter the expansion of the USSR during the Cold War, following the end of World War II. The first step towards European economic cooperation was the establishment of the European Coal and Steel Community (ECSC) in 1951 through the Treaty of Paris. The ECSC aimed to promote peace and prevent the recurrence of war between France and Germany, which had fought fiercely during the war. Both countries sought to ensure that coal and steel, essential resources for war, were jointly inspected and produced while eliminating tariffs. Of particular significance was the gesture of friendship extended by France to Germany, which had invaded France in both world wars. The ECSC became the first organizational framework for Europe, with France, West Germany, Belgium, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands as founding members. From there, Europe recognized that intensifying economic cooperation through the European Community (EC) was the key to reconciling European economies, particularly after the economic crises of the 1980s. This led to the strengthening of the European Parliament. Common diplomatic security. The establishment of a common currency, and the creation of the European Central Bank through the Maastricht Treaty signed in December 1991. In essence, the EU was born, and Europe began full-scale political and economic integration. However, there are no similar reasons or justifications for Asia to pursue such integration. The perspective that Asia should cooperate just like Europe and form a regional community might be rooted in Eurocentrism. Asia is fundamentally different from Europe, and it is essential that we recognize and acknowledge this fact. Thanks for watching this video. And please don't forget to click the subscribe and the like button.